It's 1978. America is still reeling from gas lines, oil shocks, and a brutal realization: big V8 power suddenly has a price. And inside General Motors, a quiet, almost desperate decision is made. What if, instead of more horsepower, they gave America something it had never truly embraced before? Diesel. Not in trucks, not in tractors, in everyday cars. But what almost nobody knows is the engine they rushed into millions of vehicles would go on to split an entire generation of drivers. Some swore by it, others swore at it. And what happened next changed everything. Because this wasn't just an engine story. It was a gamble, a shortcut, and for many, a disaster. By the late 1970s, the American auto industry was cornered. The 1973 oil crisis had already shaken consumer confidence. Then came 1979, and it got worse. Fuel prices spiked, long lines formed at gas stations, and suddenly, those big block V8s, once symbols of freedom, felt like liabilities. People were waiting hours just to fill up their tanks. Rationing became real. Odd even license plate days determined when you could buy gas. The whole country felt the squeeze. And it wasn't just about price anymore. It was about availability. The fear that you simply wouldn't be able to get fuel. That fear changed how Americans thought about cars entirely. European brands had an answer. Mercedes-Benz was selling diesel sedans that could go 500 miles on a tank. They were slow, yes, but reliable, efficient, indestructible. Volkswagen had diesel rabbits that sipped fuel like hummingbirds. And American buyers started paying attention, not just the eco-conscious crowd, everyone. Because saving money wasn't a lifestyle choice anymore, it was survival. So GM made a bold move. Instead of designing a diesel engine from scratch, they decided to convert an existing gasoline V8. That engine? The Oldsmobile 350. A familiar mass-produced small block with a 4.0 57-inch bore and a 3.3 85-inch stroke, displacing 350 cubic inches, about 5.7 liters. It was cheap to build, proven, already in production. GM already had the tooling, the manufacturing lines, the suppliers. All they needed to do was strengthen a few components, change the fuel system, and boom, instant diesel. On paper, it made perfect sense. In reality, it was a ticking time bomb, but GM didn't know that yet. Or maybe they just didn't want to wait long enough to find out. The new engine became known as the 6.2 Detroit diesel. Technically, GM introduced the earlier 5.7-liter diesel first, but the philosophy carried straight into the 6.2 that followed in the early 1980s. The 6.2 itself had a bore of 3.98 inches and a stroke of 3.82 inches, giving it 379 cubic inches, 6.2 liters. Compression ratio, a massive 21.3.1. That's more than double what most gasoline engines ran, and that's where the stress began. Because compression ignition doesn't just mean different fuel, it means exponentially higher cylinder pressures, temperatures that would melt pistons designed for gasoline, forces that gasoline blocks were never engineered to withstand. Horsepower? Just 130 to 160 HP depending on the year. Torque? Around 240 to 285 lb-ft. On paper, those numbers looked underwhelming, especially compared to the old gas V8s that made 350 horsepower in their heyday. But diesel wasn't about speed, it was about efficiency. These engines could deliver over 25 miles per gallon in full-size sedans. That was unheard of at the time. Some owners reported even higher numbers on highway cruises. 30 miles per gallon in a Cadillac? That sounded like science fiction. And GM marketed it hard. Quietly at first, then aggressively. Drive farther, spend less. The fuel of the future, today. Brochures showed families driving cross-country without stopping for fuel. Executives in suits filling up Cadillacs at half the cost of their neighbors. It was brilliant marketing. And Americans listened, and they bought in huge numbers. Cadillac, Oldsmobile, Chevrolet, millions of cars left dealerships with diesel badges, Oldsmobile Cutlasses, Cadillac Sevilles, Chevy Malibus, even the iconic Cadillac Eldorado got the diesel option. For a moment, it looked like GM had cracked the code. Dealers couldn't keep them in stock, but there was a problem. Actually, several, and it didn't take long for them to surface. The core issue was simple. They didn't build a diesel engine. They modified a gasoline engine and hoped it would survive diesel stresses. That's like taking a sprinter and asking him to pull a freight train. Sure, he's strong, he's fast, he's an athlete, but he's not built for that kind of sustained load. At first, everything seemed fine. Engines started, cars drove, customers smiled at the pump. Then the failures started, and when they started, they came fast. Head bolts began stretching under extreme compression. The original gasoline block simply wasn't designed to handle 21.1 compression ratios. Cylinder pressures were enormous. Every combustion cycle was a controlled explosion far more violent than gasoline engines ever experienced. And the bolts, they couldn't hold. Gaskets blew, coolant leaked into cylinders, and once that happened, things got ugly. Owners reported white smoke pouring out of exhausts, engines hydro-locking, pistons bending. Some cars wouldn't restart after coolant flooded the combustion chambers. Others limped along, burning coolant with every mile. And then there was the fuel system. Diesel engines rely on precise fuel injection timing. GM used a rotary injection pump that was sensitive to fuel quality and contamination. Water in diesel fuel? That was enough to destroy injectors. And in the late 1970s, American diesel fuel quality wasn't great. Gas stations weren't used to storing diesel long-term. Tanks weren't maintained. Water contamination was common, and most car owners didn't even know what a fuel filter was, let alone that it needed changing every 5,000 miles. So injectors clogged, pumps failed, engines ran rough, or didn't run at all. Cold starts became a nightmare. Glow plugs burned out. Batteries died from extended cranking. People in northern states found their cars simply wouldn't start when temperatures dropped below freezing. Diesel fuel gelled, filters clogged with wax, and GM hadn't prepared owners for any of this. But the real nightmare? The bottom end. Because at high load, oil pressure would drop. And when that happened, bearings didn't just wear out, they disintegrated. The crankshaft journals wore unevenly. Oil clearances opened up. And once that cycle started, it was over. One mechanic later described it like this. The bearings looked like charcoal, just black flakes in the oil pan. Metal shavings glittered in the oil like toxic glitter. And suddenly, engines were dying. Not after 200,000 miles, after 20,000, sometimes less. Some brand new cars didn't even make it past the first oil change. Customers were furious. Imagine buying a brand new Cadillac, expecting luxury, and getting a car that struggled to start, smoked at idle, and needed a full engine rebuild before your first major road trip. Imagine spending $15,000, $20,000 on a premium car, only to have it towed back to the dealer 3 times in the first year. Lawsuits piled up, class actions formed, warranty claims exploded, dealerships were overwhelmed. Service bays filled with broken diesels. Mechanics who'd never worked on diesel engines were suddenly expected to diagnose complex fuel injection problems. Parts were back-ordered for months. Some owners just gave up and traded their cars in at massive losses, and GM's reputation took a hit it couldn't easily recover from. Consumer Reports called it one of the worst engines ever made. Magazine headlines screamed about GM's diesel disaster. Trust evaporated. But here's the twist. Not all of them failed. And this is where the story gets complicated. Because for every horror story, there was someone who swore by their diesel. Owners who changed fuel filters religiously. Who used high-quality diesel from truck stops, not corner gas stations. Who let the glow plugs warm up before cranking. Who maintained the engine exactly as required. Who checked oil levels obsessively. Those engines, they ran. 100,000 miles. 150,000, some even pushed beyond 200,000, and they delivered incredible fuel economy. These owners felt vindicated, smug even. They'd figured out the secret, treated the engine right, and it rewarded them. So now you had two camps, one group calling it the worst engine GM ever built, another saying it was misunderstood, even ahead of its time. And that division? It spread across an entire generation. Friendships ended over diesel debates. Forum wars raged long before the internet made them popular. And mechanics? They were split too. Some refused to touch them. Others became specialists, making good money fixing what GM couldn't. By the early 1980s, GM knew they had to fix it. That's where the 6.2-liter Detroit diesel comes in. Unlike the earlier 5.7 disaster, the 6.2 was designed more carefully from the ground up. It still shared some architecture ideas, but it was built stronger. Thicker block, cast iron, yes, but reinforced in critical areas. Reinforced main webs, better head bolt design. Improved cooling passages that actually moved coolant where it was needed, and a more robust fuel injection system. GM had learned painfully. This engine wasn't built for luxury sedans. It was built for trucks, Chevy CK pickups, GMC Sierras, military vehicles, including the legendary CUCV, utility platforms. And in that environment, it thrived. You see, trucks didn't demand smoothness or silence. They demanded durability, and the 6.2 delivered. It wasn't fast. 0 to 60 took over 20 seconds in some configurations. Passing power was optimistic at best. But it could tow. Not like modern diesels, but enough for work duty. It could idle for hours. Construction crews loved that. So did utility companies. And it could run on poor quality fuel without instantly destroying itself. Military versions ran on whatever was available and kept running. Suddenly, diesel made sense again, but only in the right application. But the damage was already done. Because in the minds of many American drivers, diesel now meant one thing: unreliable, noisy, slow, and worst of all, risky. A gamble they didn't want to take again. Even as the 6.2 proved itself in trucks, the passenger car diesel market collapsed. Sales dropped sharply. Dealers stopped pushing diesel models. Inventory sat unsold on lots, and by the late 1980s, GM quietly backed away from diesel passenger cars altogether. The experiment had failed, at least in the eyes of the public. The stigma was too deep, the wounds too fresh. But here's what most people don't realize. The idea itself wasn't wrong, it was the execution. Years later, diesel would come back, stronger, cleaner, more advanced, turbocharging, direct injection, electronic control, common rail fuel systems, emissions controls that made diesel cleaner than anyone thought possible. Engines like the Duramax would redefine diesel in America. Powerstroke, Cummins, these engines made power, real power, and they were reliable. Finally. But the shadow of those early GM diesels? It lingered. Even into the 2000s, you'd hear people say, "I'd never buy a diesel, not after what GM did." That's how deep the impact was. An entire generation scarred by one failed experiment. So what really went wrong? It wasn't just engineering, it was timing, pressure, and shortcuts. GM needed a fast solution to a fuel crisis. So they took an existing gasoline platform and pushed it beyond its limits. Instead of redesigning everything, they adapted. Instead of testing long-term durability, they rushed to market. They needed an answer by model year 1978, not 1985. And when things failed, they failed publicly. Loudly, expensively, and permanently. In driveways, on highways, in parking lots. Every smoking diesel became a rolling advertisement for GM's failure, and people remembered. By the end of its run, the 6.2 Detroit diesel had built a strange legacy. In trucks, it earned respect. Not love, maybe, but respect. Contractors drove them for decades. Ranchers kept them running with basic maintenance. Military blazers and pickups served around the world. In cars, its predecessor destroyed trust. Completely, irrevocably. Production eventually gave way to newer designs, including the 6.5-liter variant in the 1990s. The 6.5 tried to fix remaining issues, added a turbo in some configurations, made a bit more power. But by then, the damage was already written into automotive history. And collectors today, they remember. Some hunt down clean 6.2 trucks, praising their simplicity and mechanical honesty. Others avoid anything with Detroit diesel from that era. Two completely different perspectives. Same engine family. That's how deeply it divided people. And that division, it still exists. Go to any classic truck meet, mention the 6.2, and watch the room split. In the end, this wasn't just about horsepower or fuel economy. It was about trust. GM tried to change the future overnight and paid the price. Because that 6.2 Detroit diesel and the disaster that came before it didn't just introduce diesel to America. It defined how an entire generation felt about it. For better, and for worse. If you enjoyed this story, let me know what you want to see next. Another controversial engine, a forgotten failure, or a legendary comeback. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into automotive history.